Hello and welcome to the course to prepare you to take the ESL TExES exam, supplemental number 154. My name is Minda Lopez and I'll be your guide as we go through the test prep materials and as I explain things to you that are on the PowerPoint. This first section is an overview of the exam and how to prepare for the test. What is the TExES exam? TExES exams have been designed for entry-level knowledge and skills in a particular content area for teachers in Texas public schools. The TExES exam is called a criterion reference test, and what this means is that this test tests your knowledge in relation to an established standard or criteria of competence. The TExES exam is not a norm reference test. What norm reference tests do is that they compare your results to everyone else that has taken that test or that assessment. So a norm reference test, like the GRE or the SAT, they give you a score that's a numeric score, and then they also give you a percentile ranking. What that percentile ranking does is it shows you where you fall in the entire population that took that test in a particular amount of time. Again, the TExES exam is criterion referenced, so you're being evaluated on whether or not you met a particular criteria or a particular standard of competence. What does this test look like? This is the ESL supplemental test number 154. This test covers ESL competencies, instruction and assessment, and I'll talk about those competencies a little bit later in this PowerPoint. The ESL supplemental test is only offered on the computer through computer-administered testing. There are approximately 80 selected response questions. Most of these selected response questions are multiple choice questions with one answer. There could be some exceptions. I'll talk about those in the next couple of slides. Within the 80 questions that you will get for your ESL supplemental TExES exam, there are going to be some questions that are not counted towards your score. What the preparation manual says is that these exams may include questions that are evaluated for future administrations and would not affect your candidate's score. It can be anywhere from 5 to 10 to maybe even 20 questions that are these type of testing questions or questions where you are helping the people that created this test to determine whether or not those questions should be included in future tests. One of the things about this test is that you don't ever know which ones count and which ones don't count. That is not something that's transparent. You are given about 5 hours of time to complete this test. The first 15 minutes are going to be a short tutorial and signing some agreements regarding the exam, and the rest of the time, about 4 hours, 45 minutes, are dedicated to testing. The test items are mostly multiple choice. Sometimes there'll be single questions, and sometimes there will be clustered questions or a few different questions that are related to the exact same scenario. For most of the questions, you will respond by clicking on an oval to choose a single answer choice from a list of options, like a traditional multiple choice. Some questions, however, may ask you to respond in various ways that utilize the technology. For example, you could select all that apply. What I've seen is that there are sometimes 3 correct answer choices. So instead of just correcting one, it would say you need to select 3 answer choices. Some might be where you type into a box, or you click on a particular box, or you might click a part of a graphic. You might click on a sentence. For example, they might ask you which of the following sentences contains an error, maybe a grammatical error, and you would click on that sentence. They might ask you to drag and drop particular answer choices, or you may also have a drop-down menu. So the people that are creating this test are now utilizing more technological options when they have you complete this test. What about my score? Your score report will be emailed to you if you requested this option when you registered, and this is something you should request. Otherwise, you will have to go and look for your scores. You won't be charged extra, but when you go in to register, there will be a place where it asks you if you want your scores emailed to you. You should click yes, and that way your score report is emailed directly to you once the scores are available. They have score report dates for your particular exam, and you have to go and look for when those are depending on when you take the exam. Typically, there's about a 3-day time period, say January 1st through 3rd, for example, and then on January 5th, those scores would be available for a certain amount of time. Know that your final scaled score will be based only on questions that count towards your score. So those guinea pig questions that they're going to have on the test, those are not going to count towards your final score. Another thing that you may have noticed here on this slide is this term scaled score. What does that mean exactly? What scaled scoring means is that each item may be worth a different amount of points. So when you have a scaled score, you can't really average the number or take the number items correct and then find your score that way, because each item may be worth a different amount of points. The people that have created this test do not tell us how many points each item is worth, and so it's not even something that we know really. All that we know is that each item may be worth a different amount of points. What you're going to be looking for when you get your score report is that you made a 240 or above. 240 is the minimum passing for the TExES exams. Some general tips for the test now that you kind of have an idea of what the test looks like. Whenever I give these prep sessions, a lot of people ask me if this test is hard. That's really hard to answer because I don't know you and I don't know your individual situation. I think there are certainly areas of expertise and areas of teaching certification that could help you on this exam. And then there's other areas that might sometimes be points of confusion. So my first tip is to know yourself and know if there are areas where you are going to need some extra help or extra studying because maybe you have less background knowledge or experience in that area. For example, if you have taught many years of early childhood education, or you've worked in a preschool, or you've had coursework at the university, or a lot of professional development training in early childhood, that's probably going to be a bit of an advantage for you when you take this test. Not because the test covers a lot of early childhood content, but because ESL instruction focuses a lot on language development, and that's a lot of what we focus on when we work in early childhood. So those areas are going to naturally help you for this test. Another area that would really help you in answering items correctly on this test is if you have a strong background in teaching literacy. If you are a master reading teacher, or you're a reading specialist, or you've taught in kinder, first and second grade levels at the elementary, and you've had a lot of training in language arts and teaching literacy, that's probably going to help you on this test. Why? Because this test asks a lot of questions related to literacy, language development, and language arts. On the other hand, if you're a high school physics teacher, you probably don't have a lot in your background that lends itself towards teaching reading and writing or early literacy skills. So that's an area where maybe you would want to read a few extra journal articles or pay extra attention to that part of the test. Another area that I think helps people, but on the one hand, but on the other hand could hinder you, is if you have a background in special ed. Special educators, what really helps them is the paradigm where they look at students with a particular point of view. They're looking at students as, how can I build on this individual's strengths? That is really going to help you for this test. What's not going to help you so much are the legal parameters and legal issues related to special ed. Those are unique to special ed and very different from the legal parameters and the laws and mandates that we have regarding English learners. So when you get a question related to law or even certain aspects of mandates and the tone, you should just know that that's going to be an area that might be a little bit different. One of the things you should keep in mind is that you have plenty of time to finish the approximately 80 questions on this exam. You have almost 5 hours. That's plenty of time for you to make sure that you read through the questions thoroughly, you know exactly what they're asking you, and you can thoughtfully respond and answer the question. One of the best ways to approach a multiple choice test is here in the third bullet. You need to read the question carefully, read through the answer choices, and then eliminate answers. This is one of those tests where usually you can eliminate two answer choices right away, and then two of the other answer choices are very close, or maybe it seems like they're both right. And so that's where you really want to spend your time trying to figure out which of those two is the best answer choice for that particular question. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to avoid absolutes. Absolute words in multiple choice tests and the answer choices that you're looking at are usually wrong. Why? Because there's always going to be an exception. So an example of absolutes are words like must, always, or never. These are words that you want to very carefully consider in your answer choices. If you see those, it's probably not going to be the right answer choice. The second bullet here, in terms of how to eliminate answers, talks about really honing in on what are some trends in education, what are some popular methods or popular points of view. These are things that also help us choose the right answer out of the two. So if we've eliminated and we're down to two and we're trying to decide which one is more closely aligned with what they want us to say, or which one is more closely aligned with that question that they've asked us, sometimes it has to do with a particular trend in education or a particular trend in education or language education like ESL or bilingual education, or it's that this point of view is more aligned with the ideologies or the belief systems of ESL educators. So I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. The next bullet, referring a student to special ed, you want to avoid that. We're not saying that this doesn't happen in real life, because sometimes, of course, it does. It has to be a very careful consideration. But in this test, if you were to choose the answer choice that basically just says, oh, refer that student to special ed, what the people that made the test are interpreting that as is, you're not really doing your job, or you don't really know what to do, so you're just going to let somebody else handle it. And for this test, that's not what we want. The last bullet there says tone is important. This really means a lot of things. And what you need to keep in mind with tone is the first thing for this test, this ESL test, is there's a tone and the importance of equity. Our English learners deserve a high quality education that's equitable, that gives them equal access to the curriculum, which in TExES is the TEKS. So that's really important. If you ever come across an answer choice that makes you feel like, or that the wording is in a way that makes it seem like it's dumbing down the curriculum or has lower expectations of students, you don't want to pick that answer choice. That is against the paradigm for this test. You want to focus on high expectations, equal educational opportunity, on respect for diversity and respect for all. So if you get anything that gives you a different kind of perspective, you want to avoid that answer choice. Here's an example of what I'm talking about in relation to tone. So let's say this is a question on our exam. Miss Lopez has an English language learning student, Maria, in her 4th grade class who's reading on a 1st grade level. In order to best meet Maria's reading instruction needs, Miss Lopez should A. Use materials from a lower grade level. B. Use materials on Maria's instructional reading level. C. Send Maria to another class for her reading instruction. Or D. Help Maria with her reading by giving her the text the day before it's used in class. I'll let you think about that for a minute and then we'll talk about it. So the correct answer choice here is B. Use materials on Maria's instructional reading level. So many of you were probably looking at these and going back and forth between a couple of them. If I look through all these answer choices, let's talk about why the other ones aren't good options. Let's start with A, use materials from a lower grade level. That answer choice has a tone of dumbing down the curriculum or of having lower expectations. So that wording makes it sound like we don't have high expectations for our student. So that's one reason why we don't like A. If I look at A and B, honestly, they're saying pretty much the same thing. But the tone in B, use materials on Maria's instructional reading level, is much more positive and much more professional. So B is the better choice there. If I look at C, send Maria to another class for her reading instruction, this can sometimes stigmatize students and sets them apart in a negative way. So that's not what we want. In addition, this practice in C of sending a student outside of their class for reading instruction can also sometimes mean that the student misses important instruction that's happening in their classroom. So that's another reason why that's not optimal. If we look at D, help Maria with her reading by giving her the text the day before it's used in class, there's really no additional instruction happening there, and the teacher is not really meeting Maria's reading instruction needs by just merely giving her the text the day before they go over it in class. So D is not optimal either. So out of those choices, B is the correct answer. B is the best choice. Even though A and B are kind of saying the same thing, B says it with a much more positive and professional tone. So that's an example of an item that you could see on the test, or a similar question that you could see on the test that shows you how sometimes you have very similar answer choices, but one has a much more positive and equitable kind of tone than the other one. Some other tips for the test. I would encourage you all to use the background knowledge that you have. If you've been a teacher for a while, you have a wealth of background knowledge. So always think of your own experiences and that background knowledge that you have as something valuable to help you answer questions, but always through the lens of this is the perfect world, or some people might say rose-colored glasses. So you can't think too practically, you have to be thinking perfect world, but you shouldn't do away with all the experience you have either. So you need to use the experience that you have as a teacher or maybe as a student, and then always think about, okay, but what is this context of the perfect ESL world? Another thing to remember is that there are some trends in education and best practices in language learning and in education as a whole that will help you find the right answer. And some of these are included here. For example, multiple intelligences. On this test, sometimes they could ask you something as straightforward as, you are teaching a 4th grade class and you have a visual learner. What kinds of activities would you be sure to include to meet that student's needs? And the answer would be to include visuals, to include things such as pictures, gestures, modeling, that those are very important aspects of learning for that visual learner. Another piece or trend in education that you're going to see on this test is this notion of balanced literacy. So when it comes to literacy instruction, the most important aspect of that instruction is that we teach all of the skills through a meaningful context. So for example, in balanced literacy, we're not saying that you don't teach any phonics or any sound symbol correspondence, or we don't pick apart phonemes or take words apart into their sounds. We need to do that for some kids, but we always do that in the context of literacy as a meaningful practice, literacy as being tied to ideas for communication. So for example, if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching literacy through a balanced literacy approach, some of the things that I do are I read texts to my students. I'm going to read a piece of children's literature. That's my text. But then within that, I might ask students to pull out words that start with particular sounds or to look at certain patterns in spelling, for example. But we would do that in a way that's contextualized in the literature. We would not work on those kinds of skills just in isolation. They would always be connected to bigger ideas and to pieces of literature or to our own writing. So that's balanced literacy. When we talk about the test too, we also really like answers that have to do with cooperative learning. If you think about cooperative learning, what that really involves is students working together to come to their learning and to come to answers together, right? So think of small groups at tables working on problem solving together. When students do this, they're going to be learning from their peers, which we like that on the test. They're going to be interacting with their peers. We like that because this means that more students are going to have more opportunities to talk, to listen to each other, to read, to write. Those are all really important skills that we want our English learners to develop. So if we're encouraging cooperative learning, that's a much more learner-centered kind of classroom. It's also much more interactive and much more engaging. Those are really important concepts for language learning. So one of the things that I tell people in this course is when you are going between different answer choices, one of the things you should stop and ask yourself in trying to determine the best answer choice is, is this teacher-centered or learner-centered? If it's teacher-centered, it's probably not going to be the right answer. You want your classroom to be as learner-centered as possible, and cooperative learning is often a really great way to do that. The next bullet there has multisensory activities listed. What does that mean? Basically, that means you're using as many of your senses as possible. So we want our students to have experiences. Why? Because that's how learning sticks. I think of it kind of as this notion of most people have to learn things the hard way. The hard way is not always, experiences are not always the hard way, but that's how I kind of think about it and remember it in sort of a funny way. So for me, if I'm going to experience something, I'm learning things the hard way, and that's how it's really going to stick. So somebody could tell me, oh, that's hot, but if I touch it and I feel that it's hot, now I've learned, okay, that's hot, right? So thinking about, of course, we don't want our students to get hurt, but thinking about this test, if we can provide experiences that aren't going to hurt our students, but experiences for our students such as going outside and touching the different kinds of leaves, or collecting different kinds of rocks, or having real things in our classrooms, or having manipulatives in our classrooms that we interact with, that's really the key for learning and learning language, and that's multisensory. What we're primarily focusing on is level of English proficiency. So when you approach this test, one of the most important things that you'll see in a test question is if they tell you that you as a teacher are working with beginner, intermediate, advanced, or advanced high students. That's really critical information that you have to pay attention to. They may say, for example, Mr. Johnson is working with a 4th grade English learner from Mongolia. This student is a beginner, so what would Mr. Johnson work on in his writing first? So in that question, there's some things that don't really matter, not a whole lot. 4th grade, not really. Mongolia, not really. But beginner, that really matters. So when you approach this test, you really want to focus on, are they telling me if this student is a beginner, an intermediate, an advanced, or an advanced high student? And if they are, I cannot ignore that detail. So when we differentiate in ESL and for this test, what you really need to focus on is the level of English proficiency. That is much more important to answering the questions correctly than something like grade level or age. So some other things related to this test. The first bullet here is saying there's definitely an emphasis of being proactive as a teacher. You're not waiting for things to happen, but you are going to make things happen. So on this test, you want to always think about, as a teacher, I'm proactive. I'm going to learn phrases of this student's native language, for example. I'm going to learn how to pronounce the student's name correctly. I'm going to find resources. So one of the things for teachers taking this test, do not think practically. Don't ask about where the money's going to come from. Don't ask about if you're going to be able to find these resources or how you would even learn phrases in Thai for your new student that's coming from Thailand tomorrow. Don't think practically, think proactively. And again, proactively in a perfect world where there's unlimited resources of time and money. So just play along with their game because this is a test that was created in the perfect world. The second bullet, when you are approaching the test, think about the English learner who is from a variety of language backgrounds. In the United States, we have a lot of languages represented in our schools. In Texas, we have over 120 languages represented in our public school system. Vietnamese is the second largest language group in Texas. There's other major language groups represented in Texas, such as Mandarin Chinese, Urdu, which is a language spoken in Pakistan, Korean, Arabic. So when you sit down to take this test, be prepared that there are going to be lots of other languages that are represented on that test, and that is just something you're going to have to be prepared for. Most of the time, those aren't critical aspects of the question that you would have to know a lot of details about. Most of the time, that's just a little bit of added superfluous details and information that the people that created the test are putting in as distractors. So don't pay as much attention to that as you would to, say, a beginner or advanced student. Another thing that's really critical about this test is keywords that are specific to the field of bilingual education and ESL. So I've provided you with a glossary and with a list of acronyms that are on the website, and be sure to download those and to go over those, because often the answer comes down to vocabulary. You have to know what the acronyms are and what they mean and what they stand for, or you have to know different terms that we use in the field of language acquisition so that you can answer the question correctly. So that's part of the goal of this course and of this website also, is to familiarize people with terms and acronyms that you'll see on the test, because they are critical components of the field of ESL. Here's just a couple of acronyms that you'd need to know. First is EL or L or ELL. In the state of Texas in July of 2018, Chapter 89 was changed a little bit to use just EL or English learner to depict our students who are either in bilingual or ESL programs. So these are students whose dominant language is not English. Another acronym you will see used for them is LEP or LEP, which stands for Limited English Proficient. These are the same groups of students, and typically what you'll see is LEP is used on government data and PEIMS data, and EL or English Learner or L is used everywhere else. Another acronym you might see is ESL, stands for English as a Second Language. This is a broad programmatic term or title that's used for all kinds of programs in Texas. Another more specific one is ESOL, which stands for English to Speakers of Other Languages. And that acronym is used in Texas to refer to a high school English class that is designated for recent immigrants only who are English learners, and they can get the same kind of credit in that class as they would get if they were in English 1 or English 2, for example. So the ESOL 1 class would be equivalent to English 1 at the high school level and gives our English learner students who have been here 3 years or less the same kind of credit that they would need towards graduation that other students are getting when they take a class such as English 1. Remember, there's a lot more acronyms and a lot more terms that are available to you both on this website, and then the other thing is, as you go through the course, anytime that there are terms or acronyms that are in a different color like red, remember that those are red so that you will notice them, and remember that those are probably fairly important terms and acronyms for you to remember for the test. So finally, we're about ready to get into the content of this test preparation course. So be prepared to take some notes along with the slides and listening to me as I go through the content. I would recommend finding a quiet spot where you can listen actively to the videos. You're not distracted. You can jot down ideas or answer questions as they come up in the course, and you can really concentrate and focus on the material. The course is divided into 4 sections. This has been the introduction and the overview with a description of the test environments and various tips. You also have Domain 1, which is kind of like linguistics. It's basically understanding language, language concepts, language acquisition. So that's a pretty scientific and linguistic kind of domain. Domain 2 asks you to understand those foundations that we cover in Domain 1 in terms of linguistic concepts, language acquisition theories, and then apply them into the classroom, apply them in your ESL instruction and assessment. And most of Domain 2 is going to consist of scenarios in the classroom. So that's a lot of what you're going to see in your Domain 2 questions when you actually take the test. Finally, the last piece of the course, which is part of the test, is Domain 3, and that covers foundations of ESL education, which includes history and law. Also, cultural awareness, so understanding how to foster cultural awareness in teachers and your students, how to capitalize on what families bring to the school scenario and to this country, and also family and community involvement. So how to advocate for our students, how to best support them, and to meet their needs as they go through our school system.